Hey everyone, welcome to Tennien's Corner. I'm Jesse, and it's a great time to be a Godzilla fan. I definitely count myself as one. As you can see right here, I love this character. We got a new TV series, Monarch: The Legacy of Monsters. There's going to be a sequel follow up to Godzilla vs. Kong, and then we're getting a new Toho Japanese Godzilla, Godzilla Minus One, which I am so excited to watch. So I just wanted to share one of my personal favorite Godzilla films, which might not be on everyone's list, but this is Godzilla 1985, which is the American version of the original Japanese version titled The Return of Godzilla, which came out in 1984. The plot of both the American and Japanese versions is pretty much the same. A Japanese fishing vessel is caught in a storm off the coast of Daikoku Island. The island erupts, and a giant monster emerges from the volcano. A reporter, Goro, discovers the vessel, and then the only survivor, Okumura, confirms that the monster he saw is Godzilla. I think the reason that I love this film so much is pretty simple. I watched it as a kid, and so I have this nostalgic, sentimental attachment to the movie. I first watched it on VHS, and for those of you who've seen the VHS, you'll remember that they include that animation short, Bambi Meets Godzilla, which is so funny and hilarious, and I always looked forward to seeing that when I popped in the VHS. In the American version, Godzilla 1985, they do the same thing that they did with the original 1954 Godzilla, which came out in the US in 1956. Similarly, here they add American actors and scenes, they redub it into English, they re-edit it, and for example, one of the things they do is they bring back the character of Steve Martin. No, not the comedian Steve Martin, the character of Steve Martin played by Raymond Burr, who first played that character in the 1956 American version of Godzilla. He comes back as that character. Other changes in the American version is the emphasis on more of the Soviet American tensions that are an element in the Japanese version, but they're made more apparent here. And also, they rearrange the sequence and arrangement of certain scenes where some scenes come before others and so forth. Little changes like those. When we look at the Japanese version, The Return of Godzilla, they started developing that movie in Japan after Toho had taken a hiatus from making Godzilla films. So the producer and co-creator of the original 1954 Godzilla, Tomoyuki Tanaka, wanted this movie to have a darker, more serious tone and bring Godzilla back to his roots as this kind of awe-inspiring, terrifying figure, and kind of shift away from that portrait of Godzilla that we got in the 60s and 70s, where he became more of this heroic, anthropomorphized character and a more kids-friendly character. In The Return of Godzilla, they wanted to bring it back to Godzilla's roots and have a more edgier, kind of mature take on the character. American studios and producers were concerned that the American audience might find it a little too cheesy, and so initially they decided to make the American version a comedy. In other words, they would rewrite the entire script as a comedy, redub it with comedic dialogue, and really lean into those campy, cheesy elements. And one of the inspirations, for example, was Woody Allen's What's Up, Tiger Lily in the 60s, where Woody Allen took an actual Japanese, I think, spy thriller and redubbed it into English and made it into this goofy screwball comedy. We would have potentially gotten a much different Godzilla movie in the 80s if it wasn't for Raymond Burr, who, when they brought him on to reprise his role, he didn't like that idea and wanted to honor the character of Godzilla. And ultimately, I think that was the right decision to maintain the darker tone of this movie and honor the original Japanese vision for this character. One difference between the American and the Japanese version is in the treatment of the title sequence. And if I'm going to be honest, I prefer the American opening title sequence to the Japanese. I just love how in that version you have the slow reveal of the title with those tears across the screen and the fire with that orchestral music composed by Reijiro Koroku, one of my favorite Godzilla themes. Just an absolutely amazing score and really sets the mood and the atmosphere for the film immediately. And it's just so evocative and awesome. I can't say enough about this score. The Japanese opening title is similar in that you have the fire and you have the lava, but you don't have that slow reveal of the title. And I think in terms of like the mood setting, it just worked for me better in the American version. Also, this movie features one of my favorite reveals of the character in the entire franchise, which comes when Godzilla is attacking a nuclear power plant and one of the employees is running and falls to the ground with the ground cracking underneath his feet, and the camera slowly follows his gaze as he looks up at Godzilla, and there's that slow reveal, and it's just awe-inspiring and amazing, particularly as a kid watching that. And it's a moment in the film and reveal that is very much, I think, referenced and emulated in Gareth Edwards' 2014 Godzilla, where you have a similar first reveal of the character. Upon rewatching the movie, I will say that the Godzilla scenes don't quite have the impact they did as when I was a kid, and that's partially due to the special effects, which, yes, they are kind of cheesy and corny. He looks like a big walking toy. The way they do Godzilla's movements and effects is through a combination of a guy wearing a suit, an animatronic puppet, and a little bit of stop motion animation. And they use miniatures to create Tokyo City when Godzilla is attacking the city and the army, the little tanks and missiles and jet planes. It looks like a big toy set, but that's also part of its charm and the charm of these films. It's just an aspect and element of, all of these Godzilla films that they have that kind of corny, campy charm to them. One other noticeable change in the American version comes in the opening first act of the movie on the fishing vessel when a reporter, one of the main characters of the movie, discovers a lone survivor on the vessel, but then gets attacked by this mutated sea louse. That scene in the American version is shortened, whereas it's more extended in the Japanese version. And I think for similar reasons, they edited it in the American version because they probably felt it would have been a little too corny and didn't want to show as much of the creature. And this is one instance where I prefer the Japanese version. I like seeing more of the creature, despite my criticisms of the effects. I do enjoy the camp factor and the cheesiness of these movies, and so that scene worked for me more in the Japanese version. So the opening act does a great job in setting the mood and leaning into those horror elements that were kind of missing from those 60s and 70s Godzilla films. I mean, on this fishing vessel, you're seeing disturbing stuff like cadavers, mummified bodies. I just wish it was maintained throughout the rest of the movie because I do think it kind of fizzles out by the end of it. And I think partially that's, again, due to the campy special effects, which, hey, come with the territory. But from the opening title sequence to the first act of the movie, there's such a great setting of mood and atmosphere that you are going to see a darker version of Godzilla, which you do kind of get. But I think it retains enough of those elements from the campy Godzilla films that it creates a kind of mixed bag. That said, I do think when Godzilla in the third act of the film is destroying and leveling Tokyo, you get some greatly nicely edited scenes of crowds running in terror, which really gives a nice sense of scale and really a grounded kind of realism to those scenes, which they wouldn't otherwise have because of the goofy, fantastical special effects. In terms of design, I really like this one right here. This Godzilla design really had its first appearance, I believe, in 1989 with Godzilla versus Biollante, which was the follow-up to Godzilla 1985 or The Return of Godzilla. And this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Godzilla design. I think they really nailed it here. And this goes into another reason that I think I have a particular fondness for Godzilla 1985, which is because it's seen as the first entry in the Heisei era of Japanese Godzilla films. The Heisei era is my favorite era of Godzilla. It encompasses like 7 films. It's also known as the Versus era because a lot of the films have verses in the title. So that's another reason I admire this movie because the Heisei era Godzillas are the films that I watched as a kid. And regarding Steve Martin, Raymond Burr's character, I guess they invite him to the Pentagon, which is never really explained, but I guess he's the Godzilla expert. He has no role in the plot really whatsoever, other than to provide this like philosophical commentary in the background, but his character is kind of inconsequential. And the American actors are really bad. You just don't buy them as US military guys. And you can tell the actors are just not taking this seriously and just leaning into those B movie hammy acting styles with the stilted dialogue and no expression and monotone and just horrible. But in retrospect, watching it, it makes the viewing experience pretty funny. Also, the Pentagon evidently loves Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper had launched a marketing campaign for the American version of the film, which is featured in a lot of the new scenes. Another aspect of the Japanese version that I prefer to the American version is that the Japanese version goes into the biology of Godzilla, and you discover that Godzilla has a bird like brain and has a homing instinct similar to a bird when they migrate. Now, the ending and climax of the movie is the same in both versions, except for one difference, where in the American version, you have a voiceover monologue by Raymond Burr. And whenever I was watching the climax of this movie, and I was watching it as a death scene of Godzilla, I didn't know he was coming back in other films. I viewed this as a death scene. I always, every single time as a kid, was bawling my eyes out. And I found Raymond Burr's voiceover incredibly powerful and moving. Now, again, in retrospect, looking back at the film, the dialogue, the monologue is cheesy, is very cheesy and corny, but still, I mean, I think back to when I first saw this movie and this the emotional, sheer emotional impact it had on me, and I mean, at that point, I can't remember a time at a movie or at the movies that I cried so hard as at this movie. So that's why I give this movie like credit and respect because it really did move me. When going back and looking at the production history of Godzilla 1985 and the Return of Godzilla, when researching this, I didn't realize that while Toho Studios was taking a hiatus from making Godzilla films, an American filmmaker, Steve Miner, was developing his own American Godzilla movie in 1983. And he hired Fred Decker to write the script. Fred Decker, who wrote and directed The Monster Squad as well as RoboCop 3. This movie was going to be a big budget American movie with big A-list actors. And then studios ultimately turned this movie down because the budget was too hefty. There's a whole subplot in the Godzilla 3D script where Godzilla is searching for its lost offspring. So there's more of a clear motivation for the character Godzilla than you got in Godzilla 1985. Even that subplot is incorporated and revamped in a certain way in the 1998 American Godzilla film. I do appreciate both versions of the movie. And like I said, I do have this sentimental attachment to Godzilla 1985, and the whole experience of watching that VHS tape with the animation short, Bambi Meets Godzilla. And that was just an experience that I'll never forget. Like in terms of like movie watching, I'll always remember it. Uh, but and like I said too, I prefer the opening title sequence in the American version. I think it's much more ominous and really establishes the mood better than in the Japanese version. But I think having seen the Japanese version now, there's a lot in that that just works better. It works better. I mean, honestly, in terms of the pacing, the plotting, and also the explanation for what's going on. And I also appreciate how uh, they put a scientific lens on Godzilla and go into Godzilla's biology, like I said, and do it in a way that you hadn't seen before with that character. It was fresh and new at the time. I also appreciate how the Japanese version is not embarrassed about the movie. It's not embarrassed about the type of movie it is. It's a creature feature, it's a big monster movie. And I think when distributing it in America, it really reflected Hollywood at that time where it was embarrassed by this type of film. It thought it wouldn't be able to sell it unless it made it into a comedy. So I'm glad that they decided not to go that route and just kind of maintained that kind of dark tone that was intended. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please support the channel, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time here.